Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I think we had a very vivid and interesting morning. I hope everybody enjoyed his or her tour. My name is Pascal Decker. I'm the managing director of Stiftung Brandenburger Tor, and I welcome you again to our house, to our afternoon session. I'm very glad to have all of you here. Even if there's a big competition this weekend in town with the gallery weekend, I'm very glad that so many people joined us for this afternoon. Let me just explain in a few words why we, Stiftung Brandenburger Tor, cultural foundation of a bank institute, Berliner Sparkasse, think that we might be the right organization to organize a conference like Art Talking Business, which is maybe not understandable on the first view. We are in the Max Liebermann house, and Max Liebermann, as many of you I'm sure might know, was an impressionist painter here in Berlin in the 19th century until 1986 or 6, I think he died. But he was not only a painter, he was not only what you could call a art politician, because he was president of the Prussian Academy of the Arts here at the Pariser Platz, but he was also a mover and a shaker of the art market of his time. He really was influential in terms of making artists on the market and making himself on the market as well. He was really successful in establishing his art. But he had a very deep understanding that you need the art market if you want to achieve a high level of cultural exposure. And that's what we understood as, if you want, the heritage that we have as a foundation here in this house. We are neutral. We don't have our own agenda, and we think the right place to discuss all the issues or the questions which are important for the art market of our day. And we are convinced that Berlin has a big chance to stay one of the places worldwide when it comes to art, but we think Berlin has to do something to stay there. And one thing that we have to do is to think about new business models, new market achievements that we can also establish here in our town. So I hope I could explain to you why we as a non-profit organization think that we, may tackle business issues. And we established 1 year ago this conference format, Art Talking Business. One thing that is very important in our view compared to other conference formats is that we think at least 60 to 80% of the time of the conference should be dedicated to networking instead of listening. So that is why we started today with the tours, and that's why we have the reception after this wonderful and very interesting panel discussion this afternoon. So take the time. You're all invited here. You're all important. We want that you network, that you develop new projects for this town and for the art market itself. Thank you again for being here, and I pass the microphone to Laura Hirvi. Thank you.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear speakers, on behalf of the Finnish Institute in Germany, I would like to warmly welcome you all to this afternoon's debate. We have an exciting group of speakers who are all experts in their own fields, and I'm very much looking forward to the insights we will gain from today's discussion on the issue of Siegerkunst, masterpieces, and how museums deal with it. Before we actually start the conversation, I would like to give you a brief overview on what the Finnish Institute is all about. The core mission of the Finnish Institute in Germany is to promote dialogue across national borders. In particular, we are keen to promote exchange in the fields of culture and science between Finland and the German-speaking Europe. In these regards, the event tonight is a good example how we try to accomplish those goals. We work together with local partners and build in collaboration a platform for a vivid exchange of ideas and knowledge across borders. Next year, it will be 25 years that the Finnish Institute has been working in Germany as a non-profit organization. The main funding comes from the Finnish Ministry for Culture and Education, and one may ask whether there is still a need for institutions such as ours, or that of the Goethe Institute, or the Institut Français, or the British Council. To be honest, when I started working at the Finnish Institute about 3 years ago, I was contemplating on this question. But this was before Brexit had happened, and before calls for our nation first got so prominent. So from today's perspective, my answer is a strong yes. There is still a need for institutions like ours that help to create bridges across national borders and thus hopefully help to erode their meaning and divisive power in the long run. And that you don't forget us, we brought you a goodie bag with our name on it and actually also a publication of an artist, Wille Andersen, who's also present here tonight, and network also with him. Before introducing today's speakers and our moderator, I would like to thank Pascal Decker, Sebastian Pflum, as well as their team from the Stiftung Brandenburger Tor for a great collaboration that brought us all here together for this discussion. And I have to say, I was prepared that there's Finnish food. I was very honored by this in general. But as a Finn, when you get these cloudberries, that was the dessert, I kept on talking about it, I think, for 20 minutes. That's really rare. I have handpicked them myself in the woods. It's a lot of work to go into the woods, to find the right places, and you all were privileged, I think, to have tried cloudberries here in Berlin. I don't know where you got them from. And it's a secret. And another thing I can't help but tell you at this point is that my last name is Hirvi, and what you actually ate today, the meat, that's Hirvi, elk. So you learned a word in Finnish that you won't forget, and also elk meat I never ate here. So I really have to say food is bringing people together, culture is bringing people together, but I will not forget this lunch. So finally, I have the honor of introducing this very exciting panel we will have the chance to listen to. I will start with Wolfgang Ullrich because his latest book on Siegerkunst has been the source of inspiration, I would say, for this panel. Wolfgang Ullrich studied philosophy and art history. In 1994, he earned his doctorate with a focus on the late work in event thinking of Martin Heidegger. He held teaching positions at various universities. In 2015, he resigned from his professorship in aesthetics and media theory at the Karlsruhe University of Arts and Design, which he had held for almost 10 years. Now Ullrich lives and works in Leipzig as a freelance author and publishes on the history and criticism of the concept of art, on modern visual worlds, and on phenomena related to prosperity. Next, then, I would like to introduce our Finnish guest, Arja Miller, who currently works as the chief curator of EMMA, the Espoo Museum of Modern Art in Finland. Before that, she worked as the chief curator at Kiasma and also as a curator at Helsinki Art Museum. Her curatorial work, that's a hard word in English, her curatorial work includes numerous solo and group exhibitions from both Finnish and international artists, as well as major international group shows. In addition, Miller has written, published extensively on contemporary art, and her particular area of interest are art installation, lens-based media and new media art, performative practices, new forms of painting, and the overlaps between art, sound, and music. As initially explained, we were eager to really create an international exchange of ideas, and thus I'm very pleased to welcome Khairuddin Hori on stage. Born in 1974 and fully trained in Singapore, Kai is best known for his multidisciplinary and unconventional approach to curating, supported by his experience in theater and work as an artist. Kai's profile was placed on Spotlight in 2014 after he was invited on board Europe's largest and internationally renowned art center, Palais de Tokyo in Paris, France, as its deputy director of artistic programming. Prior, Kai was senior curator at the Singapore Art Museum and senior curator at the Curatorial Development Department of the National Heritage Board in Singapore. In 2018, Kai was commissioned to curate Di Cine, a new visual arts festival featuring outdoor sculptures, public programs, and exhibitions. His list of notable projects is extensive and impressive. I really shortened it down. Kai is currently curatorial director and partner at Chan and Hori Contemporary in Singapore. And let me then introduce you to Ulrike Lorenz, who studied cultural science and archaeology at University Leipzig and took her PhD at Bauhaus University Weimar about the German-Norwegian avant-garde architect Thilo Schoder. She worked, amongst others, as the director of Kunstsammlung Gera and Otto Dix Haus and as the director of Kunstforum Ostdeutsche Galerie in Regensburg before she started as the director of Kunsthalle Mannheim in 2009. Lorenz manages the construction of the forward-looking new building of Kunsthalle Mannheim as a city in the city, with a radical democratic museum philosophy, including a paradigmatic digital strategy. Throughout her career, she has been involved in really numerous international collaborations, and in 2016, she curated the first big Otto Dix retrospective in Latin America. And finally, then, I would like to introduce you to our moderator before handing over the microphone to her. Julia Voss is honorary professor for art history at Leuphana University of Lüneburg and currently fellow at Max Planck Institute for the History of Science. Her PhD was on art and science in the 19th century. For 10 years, she worked as the visual arts editor of Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung and the beauty head of its cultural section. Recently, she returned to academia with a book project on the Swedish pioneer in abstraction, Hilma af Klint. She has published widely on contemporary art, exhibitions, museums, and the art market. In her book, Hinter weißen Wänden, Behind the White Cube, with Philipp Dines, she explored the interconnections between art production and the art market, as well as its public and private interests. She also writes the art column Fragen Sie Julia Voss for Frankfurter Allgemeine Sonntagszeitung. But today it's actually Julia Voss who is fragen, who's asking questions. So as you can see, we have a very exciting group of people with very different backgrounds, a really international group, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussions. So dear speakers, dear Julia Voss, the floor is yours.
So hello everyone. I can be heard? Yeah, very good. Hello everyone. I welcome my panelists, and I'm greatly looking forward to our debate. I welcome the audience, and I would like to quickly talk about the procedure today. We have roughly a little bit more than 1.5 hours. We have the speakers here, and I'm looking forward to the contributions. We have you here, and I would like to invite you also to participate in the discussion. As we have quite a lot of time, what I would like to suggest is that we have, after 40 minutes, we have a short break, and then you have like 2 or 3 questions from the audience, and then we have another audience round at the end. So you don't have to spare all your questions until the end and sort of wonder why it doesn't come up in the discussion. I will speak in English. The left side will speak in German. The right side will also speak in English. And everyone who feels more comfortable with the translation is welcome to pick up a device in the back, I think. Is it? Yeah, good. So let's start. I'd like to start the debate with a very concrete example, with a case I'm sure every one of you is acquainted with. It's the case of the sculpture Bouquet of Tulips by Jeff Koons, which I'm sure you all know, but I still quickly summarize the events. There's a big discussion in Paris about it. I'm talking about a statue here that is 12 meters in height. I'm sure all of you have seen computer renderings. It's supposed to be installed between the Palais de Tokyo and the Musée d'Art Moderne in Paris. And it was announced first as a gift by the artist to memorize the terror that struck in the city. After a while, it turned out that only the concept was gifted and the realization had to be paid for, and this triggered a lot of protests, and there was a big discussion whether this is really a gift or whether Jeff Koons isn't really taking Paris as a gift himself and as a vase for his statue. So my first question now goes to Wolfgang Ullrich, who has written, as has already been mentioned, a marvelous book called Siegerkunst, which I will translate as trophy art. It's a fantastic read, and I recommend it to every one of you. And I was wondering, talking about the bouquet of tulips, whether the book came out before this debate happened, and I was wondering, when thinking about this case, whether you would consider the bouquet of tulips trophy art, whether it embodies the characteristics you assigned to that class of art, and if so, why you think it is trophy art, and if not, why it's not trophy art.
Thank you very much for the invitation, for the first question. And excuse me, please, I prefer to speak in German because it's a little bit more fluently than my English. Yeah, dieses Beispiel ist Jeff.
So, is it trophy art or not? So, who else, if not Jeff Koons, is trophy art? Is one of the contemporary artists who, more than anyone else, define themselves through high prices and global success story. So, I think these are two criteria which for me designate trophy art. This is the first association which comes to mind when you hear an artist's name. It's the price tag that you pay for this. At the back of your mind, it always conjures up the prices, and when you read something about the masterpieces. And it's a global success story which owes itself to a motive. Jeff Koons picks up on topics from a popular aestheticism, consumerist aestheticism, and Jeff Koons also picks up, motives in his own oeuvre. I mean, tulips are nothing new as a specific form for a monument to victims of terror. I mean, this is a motive which has always cropped up in his oeuvre for the past 10 to 15 years, so it's a kind of trade brand. It's like a signature move. And I was really interested in finding out what Paris kind of did in order to protest or argue against that quote-unquote gift. I mean, one of the co-protesters was Frédéric Mitterrand, who also used to work as a minister for culture in France for many years, and he said, actually, it's fashion, it's not art. What Jeff Koons does is fashion, and it doesn't qualify as art. And I think that's an interesting feature of trophy art, that blurs the boundaries between fashion and art. It's no longer to say, well, this is high, or this is low, or this is free, or this is applied. So it kind of blurs the boundaries in one way or other. This relates to the Western history of art, or wants to develop it further. No, it stands in its own way, on a standalone way, and actually Jeff Koons found the best possible location for a showroom for his latest fashion collection. And especially if you know the situation between those two museums, that is a popular location for skaters, but it's also a beautiful location which would elevate any sculpture, like on a plinth. And it's a very photogenic location, perfect picture opportunity. So this would bring lots of brands together. Koons as a brand, Paris as a brand, the brand of those two museums. And in France, people also probably understand that actually this also brings the brand Louis Vuitton on board, because Jeff Koons is fostering a very close collaboration with Louis Vuitton, at least has been in recent years. And especially in France, Jeff Koons is very strongly associated with Louis Vuitton and the high price. So all the criteria are met for trophy art.
In the translation from Siegerkunst into trophy art, is trophy refers to the object, whereas Sieger refers to the owner and to the maker. Sieger translates as winner. Who would be the winner in this case?
Jeff Koons wäre auf jeden Fall the winner.
So the winner would be Jeff Koons, because it's a win-win situation for him. It's a prominent location, a high-profile location. Paris has lots of attractive sites. It would be an additional site, so Paris wouldn't be the loser. But who would be the loser? Well, lots of other artists who are kind of robbed of the opportunity to draw attention to what they do. And that is also inherent in the notion of trophy art. The winner takes it also. The winner trophy attracts, the attention of all the others. And those people who shadow, not form part of the 1 in a million of the people who attract attention are kind of sidelined and lost in the shadows.
Yeah.
Interpreter apologizes. The speaker is not using a microphone. The interpreters are located in soundproof booths. They can only interpret what they hear. Okay, attention doesn't mean being having to be a fashion label. Attention only means having one kind of perception. I know many artists who suffer very much from the fact that they get much less attention than Jeff Koons. Although there are very sound reasons that, in theory, they would deserve more attention than they get right now. Lots of different artists, and it's nothing to do with them being fashion labels. And they would be delighted at a solo exhibition in some mid-market location. And this is kind of the counterpart of the artist compared to what Jeff Koons is, the opposite number to what Jeff Koons is here. But your point was perfectly right. Only a fraction of those who dub themselves as, or want to become active as artists, want to see themselves as trophy artists. I mean, it's not the case that, everybody is aspiring to the status of trophy artist. No, it's a deliberate decision. People say, okay, you pander to a certain market, to certain niches, and they're prepared to serve a certain market. And as such a type of artist, you must see yourselves as an entrepreneurs. And many artists don't want to define themselves as entrepreneurs, but attention, I think, in my view, is a much broader term.
Terms we have heard now in connection with this statue, apart from trophy art, is fashion, showroom, product placement, attention. I would like to bring in public and private interests at this point now, and I'm very happy to sit amongst people who come from different realms of the art world. And what I would like you to do is put yourself in the position as if you belonged to a jury that advises the city of Paris and could either say you should accept the gift and rise and gather the money for it, or you should decline it. I would like to start with you. No, I would actually like to start with you, sorry, because you worked for an institution that is very close to the place where it should be installed. You worked for the Palais de Tokyo. So what would be your advice?
Can I preface that?
Please,
before? Okay.
Yes.
So when I joined the Palais de Tokyo, a lot of people came to me and thought that my job was to bring Asian artists to the Palais. But it was the other way around, actually. So the reason why I was invited to work in the Palais is so that I would engage more French artists, and then I would share my knowledge of Southeast Asian artists, especially, with my colleagues, with the curators of the Palais, and they would work with the Southeast Asian artists. So this space between the Palais and the Museum of Modern Art is actually quite a sacred space for us. I mean, at least when I was at the Palais. Any space in between, the fountain down below, the steps and everything. So we always negotiate these spaces with the Museum of Modern Art when we want to do something. And we always or the Palais, normally they like to put a work that is temporary there, so that it is not belonging, it's not territorial. That is one. And the other thing is, of course, given that preface, right, they always would want a French artist to be the center, of attraction, or to make that statement if there's any statement to be made. And the other thing is that road in front of the Palais is called if I'm not wrong, is called the Rue de Tokyo, and this is where the Palais get its name from. And previously, the Tokyo Road was not a road, but was the boulevard. So the big road in front of Palais, it was the Boulevard de Tokyo, but it changed the name. The name was changed after World War II, after the bombing, with US and Japan. So I think it's called Boulevard Roosevelt or something like that. It's an American name now. So there's all these historical connotations, The space itself is contested, not just the art. Yeah, so it goes beyond Jeff Koons being the brand, or this manipulative artist or anything like that, or even beyond the object itself. If the tulip was to be there, maybe for a month, I think it's not so much of an issue. They can live with that. But to be there permanently, and also if they were to install that sculpture, it would distract the work down below, where it's the offices of the Palais de Tokyo, or actually the gallery spaces of Palais de Tokyo. And then it will also affect the structural integrity of the building. So that was one of the reasons they did not want the sculpture to be there. The other thing was, I think the Palais, or even the Museum of Art Modern, felt betrayed by the city, because the city was the one who agreed that they wanted this work, and they proposed the space without, I think, the institution's knowledge in the beginning. They only found out later that they have been trapped into this situation, you know.
I would give a lot to know sort of how this
it happened?
Yeah, how this sort of happened, and what interests and what middlemen were between that. So thank you very much. That is a very interesting background to all that, and also, I guess, a very sound view on it.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Ulrike Lorenz, coming from a public institution, sort of considering.
Ja, also ich würde, Entschuldigung, ich spreche auch Deutsch, ich würde tatsächlich eine große Diskussion entfesseln, typisch für ein
trigger a major debate,
Haus,
would be typical for democratic
sehr viele Museen in dieser Welt ja immer noch
representation,
sind.
like there is in my institution. So from my point of view, this is all about the negotiation on public space, which actually goes hand in hand with
ein Stück weit privatisiert werden soll. Und ich sehe die ganze Sache extrem
the endeavor of a private artist to take the public space into private hands. So I would want to speak of a different group of losers also, the victims
man muss sich das ja mal vorstellen, da steckt ja ein gewisser Zynismus
just
auch
imagine
drin. Dieses historische Ereignis, das uns ja alle sehr betroffen gemacht hat, wird benutzt, im Grunde genommen eine künstlerische Idee, die es lange vorher schon gab, im Grunde genommen umzuwidmen und einen klassischen Image-Transfer im Grunde genommen hinzukriegen. Und das macht Koons natürlich in einer extrem souveränen Art und Weise.
Is what art usually does in a sovereign
way. Immer auf der richtigen
so
Seite,
Jeff Koons is a trophy artist. He's always on the right side of things. He always finds the right decision to make, and he always finds people to go along with him who would go down a very long road to raise the money to pay for his sculpture. So I would very much contradict the placement of that sculpture, and I would prefer to give the money to a public institution which will make sure that art as such will be a term that future generations can debate.
I'm looking very much forward to your perspective on it now.
I'm not sure, because I totally agree with you, Ulrike, with the kind of the notions of negotiations on public space, and always if you're dealing with public space, you have to respect the locals who kind of own the place, use the place, etc. But then I kind of have a difficulties to decide myself if I'm seeing this sculpture or this suggestion to be very banal or to be very provocative. So it's so trophy art, it's almost too much, isn't it? So it's too Jeff Koons. I mean, Jeff Koons is, he seems to be acting his role all the time. So I'm wondering if we are all being tricked by him, if he is kind of giving us a mirror to look how we are, how the art world is, and how there are some very suspicious things going on, unhealthy situation behind the scenes where Louis Vuitton, as Wolfgang mentioned, and these different kind of interest groups are working, and where lots of money are going on. So maybe it's not that simple, the situation at all. I don't know, I don't like it, but I'm kind of thinking if this is a conceptual work of art, after all.
Okay, and I think it's very true to point what's sort of to the entire art scene, because it's not only these public institutions like the Palais de Tokyo and the Musée d'Art Moderne, it's also the Louis Vuitton Museum, and we're also going to have a Pinot Museum soon. So in a way, this is also an environment. I wonder though whether the argument that, I wonder what you think about the argument that this sort of thematises, that this sculpture thematises what it is, and it is a kind of a mirror of a kind of neoliberal art world. I mean, just recently, Jeff Koons has been taken to court again because and it's claimed that he's not so open about his role on the art market as he claims to be, and there's a lot of going on behind the scenes. So I wonder how open this artist and his artwork really is about what it's doing on the art market. Do you think he's sort of, it's a transparent role he plays?
No, not at all. No, no. I think maybe Damien Hirst does that better than Jeff Koons for me.
Pardon me?
Damien Hirst is another example of trophy art, and very famous one, who is very much hated, especially after the previous Venice Biennial. Huge Gorgon tour thing, but anyways, maybe you're right. I'm suspicious against Jeff Koons, even though I really must respect him as an artist, what he did, early on.
Okay, good, thank you. So let's move to another case. We not only have this case of trophy art we can observe in the world of contemporary art, we very recently had the highest price ever paid for an artwork in history for an old master, an alleged Leonardo da Vinci, Salvator Mundi. $450 million paid for it in an auction. Now it has become, I think, still after the Mona Lisa, thank God, but it's probably after Mona Lisa the best known work by Leonardo da Vinci now. Again, I turn to Wolfgang Ullrich first. Is that because the way you developed your idea, your concept of trophy art, it was very much attached to the contemporary art world? So now we're dealing with old masters, and the question is, would you consider this trophy art, is Salvator Mundi a trophy art object?
Ja, auch das ist jetzt Siegerkunst geworden im Nachhinein. Und zwar einfach deshalb, weil es gar nicht mehr als alte Kunst
work has also become trophy art because it isn't dealt with as being old masters pieces anymore. Next to the spectacular prize of 450 million, which happened at an auction for post-war and contemporary art in New York. That's where it happened. So that wasn't a coincidence, and it wasn't just because it was clear that there might be wealthier clients at that auction as compared with an auction 2 weeks before that in New York, where maybe less wealthy clients were expected. But this is also down to the globalized art market and its structure. It's well known. It's a well-known fact that many in the art market are not interested in art because they have a certain idea of what art history is, of what the meaning of such a masterpiece is, or what Italian Renaissance is, and that this is a work from before the Christian Reformation. So many wouldn't even know of these categories. But this would take us back to the start. These clients want to buy the masterpieces because they're part of a super brand, of a fashion label. So that's where many buyers do not make a difference. Buying an object from Gucci, Gucci's been dead for 100 years also, or buying a masterpiece from Leonardo da Vinci, because both are well-known current fashion labels, which is why Leonardo da Vinci can also be offered as being contemporary art, because those who are interested in his pieces, in his works, are not interested for art history-related reasons, but because they want to have their trophy. And art is part of that cosmos, so Leonardo da Vinci is also part of the fashionable circle, just like Jeff Koons and Damien Hirst. And as you mentioned Damien Hirst, we might want to go to To his case also, we were able to see last year in Venice just the same thing that happened with the Leonardo da Vinci auction. Damien Hirst suggested that all the pieces were from the 2nd or 3rd century after Christ, and he told everyone a fake history, and he recorded a fake video that was shown on Netflix with a fake advert. So it was a fake story, and he showed quite clearly that with what he's offering there, he's not wanting to continue the Occidental art history's continued story or heritage, but he was rather speaking of his own cosmos. He presented himself as a brand with its new collection called Old Roman. So this year it might well be called something totally different. But this artist tells us a good story, just the very way the catwalk at the fashion show will tell you a story and draw on historic examples. So we've got a contemporary artist here who will not define his or her position via a certain location or positioning in the art world, but he totally comes out of the context of art history. And Christie's did the same thing with a Leonardo painting, or just the same day a Ferrari was auctioned as being contemporary art. This was them breaking yet another threshold, because they were saying, we don't care whether this is an artifact or whether this is a racing car, whether this is a big brand or whether Michael Schumacher was once driving this car, etc. So strong labels gathered, and that's the thing that makes the difference. Art has become to be one of the possible backdrops to this sort of event, but you can already prophesy that in a couple of years' time that the classical categories, according to which we now host auctions, will totally fall to pieces. We'll just call the category contemporary or super brands or something like that, but we will probably not need this terminology anymore.
I remember after the auction, I was talking to many different people in the museum world, and I met a few who said, which I found very funny, who said, oh, this is good news. If this mediocre painting is worth $500 million, then our Leonardo da Vinci's are at least worth $2 billion. Which was a kind of cynical commentary on it. But there was also, I think, a kind of shock of people who thought that this not only signifies that price is the most important criteria today for art, but also that in a way art history can be bought. What's your view on it, Arja?
Yeah, it's of course it's like a detective story to follow how well, I wouldn't want to be that person who sold the very same painting with, you take all the zeros off from the figure. So it happened in such a short time, this kind of tremendous increase of value, which is very interesting if you see it from outside and just to try to analyze it. But yeah, I'm thinking about who is the winner here. After all, well, it ended up into the museum for people to see it, but in Abu Dhabi, if I'm not wrong, yeah, the winner is Christie's. Yes, definitely. But still, I'm happy that it ended up to a museum, to people to see it. Such a huge question.
The other thing, right? That the profile of the buyer as well.
Yeah.
Because this time it came from the Middle East, and if I was not mistaken, one of the bidders was a Chinese buyer, and there's all this new money that's coming in, and with a lot of people from these cultures. I mean, I'm kind of generalizing now, but this is the way they understand value for a lot of people. Like winning a trophy, like what is the most expensive? Okay, I'll buy it. Like, you want to start to smoke a cigar? Give me the most expensive one, even though you don't know how to smoke a cigar. Champagne, the most expensive. Whatever, just the most expensive, because I have the money to pay. That's all. They don't really understand the history, They don't really understand how, even when it's displayed in museum, they don't really understand how it helps the public in understanding culture or aesthetics or history, you know, of humanity even, not just art history. It's just about showing off, you know.
So would you say the phenomenon is restricted to that parts of the world then? If you said sort of, it's
you mean the collector base?
Yeah.
It seems like it's starting to have a trend that way.
Okay.
You know, like people who need to prove themselves and people who want to be part of the circle. You know, because for a long time, like Asia has been excluded in this circle. So now they want to show that I can also play this game and I will play better than you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because now you have even, let's say, football teams, right, owned by Asians. And, you know, these are non-traditional owners of really expensive asset,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So I think it's about proving themselves, you know, that they've arrived.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're going to take over soon, yeah.
One could also wonder whether this is really a new phenomenon. I mean, new is the kind of big figure that's up now. I mean, that's sort of unprecedented. But if we look back in museum history and we go, for example, to the 60s, there was the case of the Metropolitan Museum buying the most expensive Rembrandt that has ever been bought by a museum, which was then around $2.1 million. It was the most expensive Rembrandt that was ever bought by a public or by an institution. It was actually a wonderful Rembrandt painting, Aristotle with the bust of Homer, still in the museum, in the Metropolitan Museum. And what happened afterwards is when this painting was exhibited, he would have large queues around the block who wanted to see the most expensive painting. So the prize seems always to have attracted large crowds. Would you say, and you're all invited also to sort of comment on each other, would you say it's a new phenomenon that's happening here, or is it a phenomenon that has been building up for the last decades anyway, or maybe even centuries?
Naja, wenn ich da was kurz sagen darf, das ist ja, gehört zur Geschichte.
I would like to come in here. I think this has been part of museums and collections histories that started back in Renaissance times already. It was always about standing out from the crowd by collecting something that others never had, because it had come from other countries and because it had been expensive and maybe because it had some content that had not found its way through the mainstream yet. So these were very old phenomena. So what, from my point of view, from a safe position of a public institution, seems to be the important thing to mention is that it is almost a joke. This is almost funny to speak about. It's hilarious, and really, I don't think that this is substantial or sustainable at all. It won't change our mindsets. This world has totally different problems to solve. It's madness. I just take this as a piece of news and I think, my goodness, you can't actually imagine what this means. These are stories only life can create. But what will the impact be? In which way will this change our lives? It might change the collectors, it might change their budgets, but there are very different things that are so much more sustainable, which is why I think we need to understand this as being part of a larger history. Museums guarantee the continuation of history so that future generations will still be able to talk about history. But we should not overestimate the importance of these trends. We can take notice of them, but we shouldn't think that we're all too relevant.
In response is also, oh, art has become so expensive, we can't afford it anymore, and we're sort of out. We can't buy it ourselves. We have to rely on sponsors and donors, and that's why we are not independent anymore.
Wir sind auf keinen Fall unabhängig, das ist richtig. Es ist keine
That's right, we are by no means independent. I mean, no public institution is independent, and we also lose in relevance,
dessen, was man früher ja
you
Kunstbetrieb
know,
genannt hat, wo jeder,
what
der
in the old
Künstler
days you
genauso wie der
used to call it
Sammler, die
Kunstbetrieb,
Galerien,
like
die
the
eine ganz
artistic
wichtige
arena.
Rolle
In
gespielt
the old
haben,
days,
aber eben auch
collectors
die
like the
öffentlichen
galleries
Museen,
played
alle ihre Rolle
an important
gespielt haben.
role,
Und nur
like
aus diesem
museums and
Netzwerk, aus diesem
etc.
Geflecht
I mean, in the
von
old artistic
Interessen,
arena,
und
and only
verschiedenen
from that
Dynamiken
network and
ist
different
im Grunde genommen der
dynamics
Begriff von
did
moderner
the
Kunst ja überhaupt
notion of modern
erwachsen.
art emerge in the
Das
first
ist
instance.
sicher so, aber
And
ich glaube
of
sogar
course,
fast
that
sagen zu können,
point is
vielleicht ist das
taken.
auch
I mean,
eine große Chance,
that's true. But on the other
dass wir
hand,
diese
maybe that
Dynamiken,
is
die es im
also an
Moment durch
opportunity.
dieses
It's not a risk
absurde
that
Geld,
we
was
can,
unterwegs
you know,
ist,
it's absurd
wie
money
es
that
gibt,
is
dass wir diese
around
nicht
here,
machen
that we
können.
we can't
spielen keine
compete
Rolle
with
mehr
the
auf dem
dynamics. So
Kunstmarkt,
we
die
no longer
öffentlichen
play a
Museen,
role
weil
in
wir
the public
gar nicht
arena,
in
the
der Lage
public
sind, auch nur
museums, because we're
ansatzweise
not even
solche Preise zu
in the
bezahlen.
least
Aber
capable of paying these
möglicherweise
kind of
verschafft uns das
prices.
einfach
But maybe
eine
that gives us a
Atempause,
competitive
ein
edge,
Innehalten.
gives us some time for
Und im Übrigen
respite,
können wir
some
uns
time
zurücklehnen,
to
weil wir sagen,
pause,
es endet
and
sowieso alle Kunst im
maybe,
Museum.
and
Nur
you
nach
know,
dem
we
Motto.
can lay back and say sooner or later all art is going to end up in a
Kai,
museum.
may I ask you, since you're much more acquainted with the Asian art market than any of us here on the podium, many of the most expensive contemporary artists are in fact, and also of the auction records for old masters are in fact Chinese artists. What kind of role does that play in the public in the cities you have worked in?
Okay. I mostly specialize in Southeast Asian contemporary art, but I know a little bit about Chinese art and all this. And I feel that for Chinese art, it is linked to the economy and China opening up its doors. Because a colleague of mine did a little bit of a research once, comparing the prices of Chinese art in auctions to the stock market in general. When the stock market prices go up, stock market goes up, the price of Chinese art goes up. When it goes down, the price of Chinese art goes down. So a lot of the prices of Chinese art, for example, is affected by the amount of investment that wants to get into China. So to enter China, you must do this soft diplomacy thing, and you know, culture is one of the instruments. So they consume local culture, and local culture, art being one of them, and then so it impacts the prices. On the other hand, if you talk about Southeast Asia, which I'm most familiar with, and coming from Singapore, which is kind of a monster sometimes, you know, we put a lot of money to kind of jumpstart the entire Southeast Asian scene in terms of the market as well. And in terms of museum tradition as well. I mean, there are museums everywhere in Southeast Asia, but I think the best maintained and supported by the government are in Singapore. You know, doesn't mean that Singapore does it best. In fact, I don't think they're doing a good job at the moment. And
what would you criticize?
Yeah, I think I am criticizing it. Yeah, because I used to work in the Singapore Art Museum, so I used to be one of those guys who write the policy papers, you know, for acquisition, for example. And mostly the direction is always political. You know, the museums in Singapore, or at least the Singapore Art Museum at that time when I worked there, the one reason why it exists, and it is not informed blatantly, openly to the public, is actually for purposes of education. So they want Singaporeans are their first target audience, to understand their neighbors, that is the other countries in Southeast Asia, through art. You know, that's it. That's the main point. Like if foreigners come or other visitors visit the museum, that's a bonus. But their main focus is on the locals themselves. That's first, most important. And then later on, they changed the. We realized that nobody has really written the history of Southeast Asian art, modern and contemporary. So Singapore decided that they will be the writers of this history, and therefore
sounds like a good idea to me. No.
Yes, but then also it means you are being a little bit dictatorial. You know, you dictate what the history will be for everybody else. You know, and that is how they start collecting, and then that is how collectors also are influenced by. You know, they look at what enters the museum or who are commissioned, and then collectors start, you know, bidding each other, and then prices for some artists will go up, and so yeah, so I don't know whether I'm being coherent, but
yeah, no, very much, very much.
But that is what is happening a little bit in Southeast Asia. So Southeast Asia has slowly, in the past, I think 5 years, started to become a new category also in the international landscape. If you notice in Paris now, there is an art fair called Asia Now, and the first time it opened, it was focused on Southeast Asian art, you know, Singapore and Southeast Asian art, and they still are focused on that, you know. Even here, I think, like IFA, sometimes they will show art from Cambodia, Vietnam, and all this. Yeah, so Southeast Asia art is becoming a real category, and then the institution with the most money, the strongest, can dominate that discussion and can set the path, and that path might not be fair for everybody else, actually. Yeah.
And again, back to the question of the prizes, would you say, because what you find, and you know as much as I do, you find that you have certain artists, they push for record prizes. These record prizes bring a lot of attention. When they exhibit in institutions, they get a lot of attention. Everybody writes about it. Everybody writes about the prizes. Again, you produce a record prize, and it seems a kind of, I don't know, back and forth, which is only about the prize. Would you say this phenomenon is also as prominent as it is in Europe and the United States in the public institutions you know?
You know, if I compare Europe and United States and Asia, right? The problem with Asia is, or for Asian artists, the challenge is this. First, you make it at home, and then you are a national artist. And second, you make it in the region, then you are the regional artist. And then you have to, after that, try to break through to the international. Then you are an international artist. Whereas if I am based, let's say in Berlin, I'm Asian, right? And then I break through here, immediately I'm international. You know, so there are many more steps for the Asian artists. And same goes for the prize. There was, I think around 2000 and early 2000s, there was one young artist from Indonesia. His name is Mas Riyadi, Balinese originally, but lives in Java. So his prize was, his painting was put on auction. He was 30 years old at this time, not so well known, right? His painting was put on auction, and then it went to $500,000, unheard of for an artist 30 years old from Southeast Asia. And then a month later, he had a solo at the Singapore Art Museum. This was prior to me joining. And then there was another painting put in another auction. A month later, it went to $1 million. You know, so that set the record. Even
and where was the auction?
In Singapore.
In Singapore.
And even in, but I can't remember whether it was Christie's or Sotheby's, but one of those. You know, it is higher than artists who were considered as the modernists, the artists of the region. You know, like out of the blue, suddenly it's like that. You know, and then there were a few more that went on that way. And most of these artists would, from Southeast Asia, it would be from Indonesia or from Thailand. Yeah, from these, mostly Indonesians, you know, they go to that price. So there's a lot of imbalance, you know, and even when this happens, the museum have no power over.
Yeah.
So sometimes even
who's behind it?
Well, we imagine it's the gallerist.
Ah, okay.
You know, yeah.
Also not unheard of in Europe or even the United States.
But still, you know, when I say this name, I'm sure most of you have never heard of this guy. You know, that's at 30 years old sold at $1 million, $1 million US. No one's heard of outside of Southeast Asia. He is still around. His work goes to auction and sells at not $500,000, slightly lesser, but selling price like from the primary market is not there. It's not. He can't sell directly at $1 million, for example. You know, at $500,000, he still probably sells at like $60,000 or $80,000. Yeah, so that kind of price. But he's a bit quiet now. You know, you don't see so much of this guy, but he's still there. He, you know, it didn't kill him totally, actually. Yeah.
So I invite everybody. I think it's a good point to have comments from the audience, questions, everything. We have a microphone here, so you just have to raise your hand, and the microphone will be given to you, and you can ask your question in English or German.
The other thing about Asian prices, right? Like from China, at one point it went up like crazy. Right? Everybody was buying a lot of Chinese contemporary art, and there's no actual support for the reasons why these prices go up in terms of like intellectual support. No scholar has, really been supporting all these crazy prices. And at one point, it just crashed.
Okay.
So and some of the artists even totally disappeared, from the market, or even stopped practicing at all. So only a few remain, and then a lot of the work regurgitations or repetitions of what they've been doing, what sells best, and yeah.
Yeah.
Ja, ich hätte noch eine Frage. Ich hatte so ein Gefühl,
I've got a question.
Diskussion.
When I was listening to the discussion, I got the
impression
impression that kind of we've succumbed into a pitfall. I'd like to get back to the Ferrari. To quote Duchamp, I think it's extremely smart by a gallery to sell a Ferrari in a contemporary art auction. These are shifts of categories and which constantly take place. If Duchamp had not been there, but luckily he had been there. Before. And then that's my first point. My second point, at one point I was in an exhibition in London, at a London exhibition. I was lucky that I got a slot. I didn't have to hand it in, but I got a slot where I could go and visit an exhibition. It was a new solution or a new idea for me as a visitor that I was accorded a slot, maybe a 1-hour slot, which I was allowed to use to look at the exhibition, but I had to wait. I had to wait for 5 minutes until my slot opened, and then the door opened. That was an exhibition of a British artist. It was really chock-a-block. There were lots of people there. What was so bizarre is that nobody looked at the pieces of work. Everybody had a microphone or an audio guide on their head and listened to it. That maybe they could briefly glance at the image just to double-check whether it was true what was being said. But as a matter of fact, hardly anyone had a look at the pieces of art. So we've got that huge mass phenomenon, and just to count the money, and it's cheap money.
Wer wurde denn ausgestellt?
Who was the artist? I'm curious now.
Turner.
So,
es gibt also auch nicht nur das Phänomen von
so we not just witnessed the phenomenon. It was a very sound, wonderful exhibition, but it was designed, conceived of for a broad audience, and that is really informing its inception. And it's about masses, economies of scale, bringing lots of people through it, and lots of money through it. And actually, it's a gift. Actually, it's a heaven sent that not every museum has to play that game, and not all we artists have to play that game either. So isn't that a big liberation? Why not leave Christie's and all of the other auction houses to it, and they can build brands and museums where they can showcase their brands. Then we've got more money for more art. It doesn't have to be a sad phenomenon. I think the seismic shifts that are taking place can also have a liberating effect, because they kind of separate the wheat from the chaff, so separate certain things from each other. Well, I would like to endorse that claim, that actually what we're witnessing here, worlds apart. So what's so crazy here is that you can also go to provincial museums and have a look at Turner at your own leisure. You don't need to wait for slots, and maybe you've got an opportunity. You might have a very meditational mood when you don't share the space with 500 other people in front of the picture, and you can really take the picture in. And that's actually what museums offers. Actually, it's public gifts because they're owned by everyone. It's part of the public polity, and we should actually use it. So we're neither sad nor are we delighted at this development. We think it's crazy. We observe it. Luckily enough, we're not directly caught up by that frenzy. But on the other hand, we're hamstrung. We can't do anything else than just just adopt a wait-and-see attitude. We don't have the resources in order to become involved in that game. So I'm part of a niche of museums where we say we work on the periphery of fringes. We've got a wonderful history. We can look back to 100 or 200 years of museum history. So we've got a history and narration in our minds, in intellectual patrimony. We've got a basis, a foundation from where we're coming from, and we know what we're doing, and that's good. And we try to work the public, and we try to establish the museum once again as a public space which gives the community a floor, and it's not just lonely people who give the money. I mean, even if they make donations, it does exist that people make donations, but we are very grateful. But there's other interests in life, and we try to be a mouthpiece for those other interests, alternative interests. And sometimes you're kind of bemused when you observe at all the rigmaroles that are going on, and when you think, well, if the only motivation is money, then it will be a flash in the pan. You already mentioned it. The artists kind of cash in today, and tomorrow they're yesterday's news. You mentioned the word liberation. It's possible to liberate. You see this as a liberation, etc. And I don't think it's that likely that it will develop into that direction, because it can also develop into two parallel universes, which eventually may be incompatible. And this brings us to the matter of attention. I mean, these few artists, high-profile artists, galvanize the support and garner the attention of the public, and then the public, which is not form part of the inner art circle, expects museums to exactly showcase these museums. And then if the museum showcases different artists, then suddenly you are faced with a kind of legitimation gap. And if through loans you can have an exhibition of these famous names and artists and signatures, maybe you can attract the people, but you can also offer the same as usual. Something that can only be marketed on that mass events, mass scale. Maybe you become, very popular with politicians, because politicians love a high visitor number, but sooner or later you feel like a sellout when it comes to the initial notion of the idea, the rationale of the museum and its mission and its vision, etc. So especially the museums are in a double-bind situation, and I think they're torn apart by that double-bind situation, that catch-22, to be a little bit of a drama queen, if you bear with me. But anyway, I think that's a massive problem.
I would like to continue what you, Kori, said actually about this. We're talking about trophy art, and as an ethnologist, we always put everything in context. And then you think of Finland too, is like what, for example, in Finland, in the context of Finland, is trophy art. An artist like Heikki Marila, you never heard of him probably, but in Finland everybody knows him, and he's one of those who's selling, for a bit more than the usual artist. So how difficult is it to translate from this national context to be a trophy artist in your country, in the Northern Europe? We can talk about Northern Europe. And then I think this was a super interesting point, because we always think about what is the role that Berlin actually plays. And we always say, everybody says here, like art is not sold here, but it's produced here. But then when you look at, so who are the European artists who are becoming close to becoming this trophy artist, producing the Siegerkunst, also these from Northern Europe, they actually all seem to live here in Berlin and to work here. So is it possible to really live in Finland and become a trophy artist, and or do you have to be somewhere close to the center? And what does it mean for what artists have to do? I mean, nowadays, is it enough you produce art, or do you have to be present where the art world is present?
Mm-hmm. Are you asking it from me? From my experience, there are some trophy artists living in Finland too. That is possible, but of course you then are very connected internationally. But well, the world is, we share the world nowadays, so I think that
some of the very important collectors are there.
Yes. This is, well, I've been thinking about hearing what you're saying and your very interesting opinions, and what is the museum's role in this trophy art, and Well, I think that we are part of the game. So crazy prizes are part of the art world madness. And even though we wouldn't like to be part of it, we are. We have to be aware also that which role we are acting in it. And I think that we have the wonderful opportunity to show something else than trophy art in museums and kind of bring in the diversity of, for instance, contemporary art making, which is so diverse, so different kind of approaches. And also the museums has the curatorial competence and the research competence to give the context of different kinds of works, and also professional kind of facilities to show different kind of mediums. If we think about very large scale installations, or well, let's say performative installations, for instance, it's almost impossible in performative installation to become a trophy art, or is it? I'm thinking aloud here and thinking at the same time I'm speaking. But in general, I think that the museum is a kind of a counterpart, and it has to kind of work very hard to contextualize what art is and what the meanings might be. And I truly believe that we all believe that art is important and gives meanings for people and histories, as were mentioned here. But at the same time, why don't we work, and we do work together with collectors. And some collectors I know and work with, they share the exact same passionate and enthusiast attitude towards the content of the arts. So I think that in the museum you are in the very interesting position, have the privilege to follow such extreme phenomena of art world. So it can be like the trophy art, the billions of dollars, and it can be something very different, something which is very small and which is as valuable as what is valued differently in different art market.
Yeah, I think it's very important that you say we as a museum, not me, you, are also players in this game. And I guess the question is, again, one about dependence or independence. And on the one hand, we have the view here, maybe the art world is like a coral reef, and you have a large diversity of different species, so you have the sharks and the fish and the survival of the fittest, but you have the corals and the fish, and you have symbiosis. So you have many different phenomena in this world, and all coexist. But the question is that the prospect into the future? Because if you say we have the wonderful opportunity at the museum to show a different kind of art also, then I wonder how much acknowledgement this might get in the future. Because let's take the example of Max Hollein. For example, Max Hollein, whom we all know now, has been a museum director in Frankfurt for more than a decade, and I'm from Frankfurt as well, so I sort of have seen, I would say, maybe all of his exhibitions. And then when he was assigned the director of the Metropolitan Museum of Arts, the two exhibitions that came up in the New York Times article was, they said he did prestigious exhibitions in Germany like Jeff Koons and Julian Schnabel. And I said, oh God, these were the worst exhibitions. He did wonderful shows, but these were really the worst things he has done. But this is a kind of international currency that would take him from Frankfurt to San Francisco to New York. He's not, and sort of, if you want to make a career, you have, and the question is, if you want to make a career in the art world, do you have to bow to a certain kind of model, or is there a chance that you can develop a different kind of model, and how sustainable is the model we right now ask from our museums? Because I have the feeling everybody is thinking about sustainability, whereas the museum only talks about growth. More galleries, more art, more expensive art, bigger collections, more money, more audience. Is there another model?
Yeah, something about that. I think what is usually assumed is the brand and value, right? Brand and value of the artist or the art, like what art you have, and therefore we're talking about big names and big money. But at the same time, we always also have this dilemma, or we often forget the changing nature of the audience as well. Especially with social media, everything suddenly changed. So you could either go the way of wanting to make people happy, have every piece of art that is Instagrammable, even if they are not famous. So everybody will come to have Instagram pictures, which happens actually. And I've seen this happen a lot. And I was sharing with some of the colleagues here earlier today about the phenomenon in Indonesia. There is a artist-run art fair called Art Jog in the city of Yogyakarta. Originally, it started off as a free-to-visit art fair. So it's a little bit like the Ngoro-Ngoro today I went. There's no booths, actually. So it's curated, and you go in, it looks like a biennale. But everything is for sale. There's no price tag, though. You want to buy, you must go to the office, and then you can ask them for the price. So when it was free entry, somehow nobody went. Very little visitors. And then about 5 years ago, they started to decide, okay, maybe they should charge a ticket. And suddenly people started coming. And this audience that started coming mostly were young, and they had about 5,000 visitors a day, Wow. And this is in a city where it's a city known for being a city filled with artists from all over Indonesia. So people are used to seeing art, but for them to have to pay to see more art is quite something. And one of the years I happened to be there, and then the organizer decided to call an emergency forum because they were shocked at the amount of people coming to the show. They wanted to know why people came. What was interesting is that, so he asked me as one of them, at that time I was working for the museum, so he said, can you stay a few more days to be in this forum? I said, okay, because they wanted the institutional perspective. And in the forum, they invited a priest, they invited an artist, a journalist, and then me from the institution, and an art critic, which was very interesting because the priest gave views on, they were all shocked by this phenomenon, right? And people were taking selfies left, right, center, to the point they don't care that it's art anymore. They wanted to touch the paintings, they want to touch everything, they want to sit on the installations and stuff like that. So that happens, and it's still happening even in Singapore. The government organizes festivals with only that in mind. Like bring more people over. And then the other thing is that there is now an opportunity for museums or art centers to actually move away from this branding, from this currency related and brand name kind of concept. Where in 2013, as an example, I was one of the curators for the Singapore Biennale, and in that year we decided that Singapore Biennale will focus totally on Southeast Asian contemporary art with a few guest artists from Japan, from India, maybe China. And we decided to make the curating a bit more democratic. We invited 28 curators, all from everywhere in Southeast Asia. And we try to look for artists even from the villages. So what I'm trying to say is this idea of discovery. So the discovery, the act of discovering new artists for the curators, for the museums, as well as for the audience. And then it is for the curators to put a presentation together where the storytelling is very strong. Where what are you trying to say with bringing, let's say, like I invited an artist from Borneo who is a realist painter that you've never heard before. But he's basically based in a village or something like that. And even one guy who actually lives amongst the tribal communities, he would spend a few months, come out, and all these kind of symbolism start to appear. It might not be that contemporary, but for Borneo, that was contemporary. In the context of, let's say, Laos, which artist is contemporary in Laos? So for example, I proposed one artist, her name is Marisa Darasavat, from Laos, to the committee of the other 27 curators. We had a big argument for an hour because they said that this is not contemporary art. Kai, why are you wanting to bring this artist over? And then I asked them again, have you been to Laos? Have you seen what is contemporary in Laos?
Yeah.
So in that context, that we need the other people to see this. But at the same time, when the public are seeing this, they realize this is the first time I'm discovering there is an artist in Laos. And they make this kind of art, So I think that is another direction we could go, So people get excited because they've never seen, they never experienced this kind of art. Even though they don't know who the artists are, it doesn't matter anymore. And then it is up to the institution's direction and the curators working with them to make it exciting and to bring back this knowledge and
I find this a very exciting path too, to say that this is about the time to also discover different concepts of art and not only try to find people who sort of fit into this kind of academy-born, sort of fueled by the art market concept, but say art is everywhere and there are different concepts and let's discover it. Yeah, very interesting. Thank you.
Can I add something?
Yeah, please.
I would like to see that show. I would have liked to see that show, and I totally kind of support that kind of thinking and policy in curatorial concepts, because it doesn't make any sense that we are all around the world, making the same thing, doesn't it? So we are in the art world that has this tendency. Is the globalized art world, have the tendency to show the same pieces everywhere. So this is the kind of a crucial thing, I think, to find out that what we also want to do in Emma in Finland, to kind of support the local scene, to find the meaning from there, to work with what we have already, the richness, to find out what is it all about, and also find something new maybe about ourselves at the same time. It doesn't mean that it's like only local, and that it's not evaluated as a local. There's no kind of I don't put these things as a local and international or anything like that. But to have the local in the context or in dialogue with international, maybe more well-known names.
Just to say also, there was one a project at the Palais de Tokyo. It was an open call for international curators below the age of 40 years old to present new ideas in curating. It's called Nouvelle Vague, so New Waves. And this exhibition had the biggest number of visitors at the opening, to the point where Palais had to stop for the next few shows, like inviting the same number of people. So it had 14,000 people come to the opening night, just in one night. And it is a show about curators who nobody knows. They are all below 40. I was one of them at that time. It's like nobody knows who this is. You don't know me, right? Until today. So but they wanted to see what are these new ideas. So ideas also have currency, I think. And yeah.
Of course. Yeah, thank you. We have another question back there.
Hi. This is kind of a topic that was brought up at the New York Times, art leaders, and it wasn't really answered there, and I'm curious if you might be able to address it, because on this idea of trophy art and high-priced masterpiece art, what is kind of the dark side of that? How is that affecting the development of the canon, and what's kind of, with that kind of bling around these large trophy art pieces, are we not kind of ignoring really good art in the periphery? And is that making it into the canon? And will we look back at some of this trophy art like we might with like an 80s sweater and think, oh my God, what were we thinking? So I'm just curious if you can comment on maybe the kind of the dark side of what's happening.
Yeah, anyone?
Also ein Aspekt haben wir ja, glaube ich, schon angesprochen.
Well, there's one aspect we touched on with regard to the dark side, which is the very one-sided shift of attention. So many other types of art, I think, are ignored.
It's very important how it is linked to the canon. Whether trophy art might not only dominate our contemporary attention, but also might dominate the canon.
Ja, ob es so weit kommen wird, bin ich noch gar nicht sicher. Ich finde, was Sie angesprochen haben, sehr wichtige Gegenentwicklungen.
Thank you. I think what you refer to is a very important counter-development. Through the social media, for the very first time, it's become possible for such a canon to form. So, a lot of what's found to be interesting has the same weight as what collectors and gallerists
eher
find
den
to be
Eindruck habe, dass sich diese beiden Gruppen sogar nochmal bestätigen und nicht unbedingt widersprechen, dass beide eben letztlich darauf gehen, sondern auf das, was sie für die interessantesten Marken halten.
So
also
maybe they look at what they think are the most interesting brands. And I think on Instagram, the artist with the most followers is from New York, but he's almost unknown here, Mark Brighton.
Man kennt ihn hier vielleicht,
almost unknown here in Germany. He might be known for having created the artwork for Michael Jackson's Dangerous album back in the time. But in Asia, this guy is absolutely famous, has so many fans, and his pictures are more expensive than Gerhard Richter's ones. So he has 500,000 followers on Instagram. So there might be wealthy collectors with giving rise to of concerns, and then there are others loving these artists and bringing them into the canon, whereas with our Western idea of art and our categories, we would say this looks like a Hello Kitty shop, these paintings. It has nothing to do with a Western museum or with a Western art canon, but this might lead to a shift. Let's wait and see how long this development lasts on.
I'm just curious then if we aren't kind of allowing the broad general public to determine what is considered not quality art, but what is considered the trend in art, where the critics and kind of more the intellectuals and in the past, which would have helped guide that, have kind of been put to the sidelines for the time being.
I guess, I think this is also a very important question, because I think what's specific about the art world is that it has very strong gatekeepers, and whereas in literature or in music, you have a huge market with many participants. In art, you have an expanding market, but you have very few gatekeepers, and I would say, compared to other markets, and I would say that the canon still goes through museums. And then when we talk about private and public, it goes through institutions. And when we talk about canonizing a work, what's tempting about trophy art is if you or Arja, or you, Ulrike Lorenz, would like to do a show with some of these artists, then there will be a lot of money, there will be a lot of sponsors, you will easily finance a catalog, you will easily find people to write about it, whereas if you want to do a show on someone less known, you might have to run around and look for money for a long time, no? Isn't it like this?
Das ist so, aber wir sind ja nicht gezwungen,
that is true,
dahin zu
but
gehen,
we're
wo
not
das viele Geld ist.
obliged to go where the big money is,
du hast
are we?
völlig recht zu sagen, es
You're
zerreißt
absolutely
uns, weil
right
auch
in saying
wir
it tears
uns
us
legitimieren müssen
apart because we too have
mit
to
einer
justify
Bilanz
what we
in der
do. We have to present
Aufmerksamkeitsökonomie. Das ist richtig.
the balance sheets
Aber wir sind
of
ja
profit
gleichzeitig
in
auch
the end and
in
of
einer
economic
Gesellschaft
feasibility.
eingebettet, die uns
But
nach
in
wie vor
society,
treu
we're
trägt.
embedded in a
Und
society
in dieser
which
Lage,
is
glaube
loyal
ich,
to us.
kann man
In this
sich auch
situation, I believe
verweigern.
that
Wir müssen
we
nicht
can
das
say
machen,
no
was
to
der
this.
Markt
We
macht,
do not have to
sondern wir
follow
haben eine
what the market
Verantwortung genau
dictates
für
or what the
andere
market seems to dictate.
Entwicklungen,
We have
das
a
zu ermöglichen,
responsibility to
was
assume.
ihr beide
We have a
gesagt habt, zu
responsibility
sagen,
to
Bedeutung in der Kunst,
facilitate
was
what the
heißt
two of you
das,
spoke about. What does it mean
demokratische
to
Massenbewegung
be
in der Kunst,
meaningful in
was
art? What do
wollen wir unsere
democratic
Häuser
mass
dem
movements
Publikum
mean in
öffnen?
art?
Was
What
heißt
do we
das, wenn
want
plötzlich
to
wir auch
show
das
to the
Publikum
public in our
ermächtigen,
museums? What does it mean if we
mitzukuratieren?
empower the public to
Bereichert
come in
uns
and
das? Also
curating?
das sind ja
Does
viel
it
wichtigere
enrich
Fragen,
us?
die uns
So these
interessieren.
are
Und das
the
ist unsere
questions that
Rolle
are so much
in
more
diesem
important. So
Konzert.
that's the role
Das
we
darf
have
nicht
to
wegbleiben.
play in this concert, and we should not forget about that.
I agree.
Es gibt ja,
Sorry, no microphone. The interpreters will continue as soon as the microphone is being used. Just a moment, please.
Ich glaube, Sie müssen ins Mikrofon sprechen, sonst kann es nicht übersetzt werden. Insofern muss ich Sie leider bitten, nochmal von vorne anzufangen, ja?
Es wurde ja gerade von dem Kanon so
So we were just speaking of the canon as such, but I think it's important to think about where this canon comes from and what power structures it represents. And in what way, in this world which has so many voices and languages, with so many regions which have raised their voices and want to join in on the conversation, well, we have to think about the way the idea of the canon changes against that backdrop. As Europeans, we need to open up our view, I think. We're called upon to do that, and we're called upon to do to have a more open-minded integration of other trends.
Actually, you touched upon a point which I wanted to mention too. I mean, tonight we're going to inaugurate the exhibition The World in the Hamburg Museum, and the National Gallery is going to its depots and looking at taking stock of what arrived over the past 150 years, which was maybe on the margins of attention, but which may merit a higher profile under the criteria of a globalized world. They unearthed a lot of things. First of all, it's an opportunity to for museums to not only vie at the next Jeff Koons, but maybe to tap unearthed potential, which may redefine the existing canon, or at least reflect the existing canon, or extend it. But of course, that also brings certain concerns. Those people who do this in the best of intentions may, become victims of their own success, but the market will fire back. Maybe you would discover unknown artists from Japan of the 1920s, and which are still in your depot. You bring them up, and you're concerned that now suddenly, like praise of vultures, the big galleries or collectors will zoom in, and of course that's another opportunity that kind of makes it impossible for further museums to make this become part of the canon. So it's just a tiny window of opportunity where you actually have the possibility to actually move something, to change something. But of course, it all happens in the best of intentions. And museums, as a matter of fact, have a very authoritative voice and strong potential. And I do indeed see this as a huge potential for the future. It's a possibility for museum to refocus on the existing assets, unaired assets, and to kind of relieve themselves or evade the pressure of the art market, or evade the mass pressure of the public. Now, I think this may also result in a new responsibility ownership of museums, i.e. redefine their own role in the canonization and the stereotypization in that process, and analyze their own spiel in the power relations in a more self-ironic way, but also becoming more aware of their own role and making their own role more visible for the audience. So basically, it's an opportunity for museums to move away from one of the hallmarks of the trophy art, so not look at that idolatry, that uncritical relationship to something which is being hyped, where there is a social consensus. People say, okay, this is what we like, maybe because it has an esoteric importance, or maybe because it's pricey. We want to empower our visitors to look at themselves in a more self-critical mind, and in order to enrich their powers of perception. And here museums can really go the extra mile. The National Museum, of course, also kickstarted by the money of the Federal Cultural Foundation. It's a huge concept. The National Museum is starting to do this, using their own collection as a starting group. It's a very fascinating concept. So without becoming involved in the art market with big money, we are very busy here in order to double-check our own
We have another question here, but if you would like to comment on the question whether we are at a decisive turning point in terms of dealing with canon, you're very much invited to answer this question too. Thank you.
No, I just want to touch a little bit also on the again the contextualization of the display of art, right? Like you might have an artist who is not part of the canon or is not a big brand, and it is then your intention of presenting it in this in the public sphere. Like what is it? And I'm beginning more and more to look at the instead of the white cube, the space as a social space, and therefore I more and more am inclined to exhibit contemporary artwork alongside maybe modern art pieces, alongside anthropological pieces, alongside, even everyday objects to make sense for the people. So it is a way of viewing once again. I think we have to kind of, purge everything out and refresh ourselves and refresh the way the audience look at objects, and no longer just about brand name and, top 10 or something like that. So, and then therefore you can, deal without this concern of how many artists are from the canon in your show or not, or whether you need to make somebody or put somebody into the canon. I think I would want to leave that to the art critics and the theorists, and I would want them to come back. It seems like they have disappeared to me,
I'm here.
Yeah, we need more of you.
Okay, thank you. So your question, please.
So my question regards, oder auf Deutsch, ich kann nicht auf Deutsch reden.
Okay, it's great, I can speak in German. I would like to make a suggestion, maybe in the debate,
dass wir vielleicht eine medienspezifische Unterscheidung machen
we could
sollten. Also ich stimme
make
zu,
a
dass,
distinction on the basis of the specific media. I agree. When it comes to galleries, when it comes to the international trade shows, painting and sculpture are the media which can be sold best. I know this from my own work. In the past, I worked for galleries. I also worked for an art advisor. So at the end of the day, we always came to the conclusion paintings sell best. Let me go on a brief detour. Coming from the art history, because we ask ourselves, how do these platforms influence canonization? Let's go back to the 19th century, Manet's Olympia. And at university, people always try to talk about a piece that was very popular in the salons. Napoleon III brought it straight away, probably for his bedroom. Cannibals, A Birth of the Venus. It's a completely kitschy picture, which no longer plays a painting, which no longer plays a role, and at the same time, it was exhibited in the Salon de Refusés, Manet's, etc. These pieces are very important and nowadays are aired in museums. Now the question is, what are today's platforms which may be the equivalent to the Salon de Refusés, our alternative platforms? What are our today's alternative platforms? And I must say, politicization of art, especially in the Biennale, gives me the impression that when it comes to international biennales, manifestos transmedials, there is a very strong political, interpretation, and different formats are being supported, like performance art, video art. These are formats. What are the infrastructures that allow that? Video art, again, is prohibitively expensive. Not everybody can afford producing video art. Maybe it would make sense to alternatively shed some light on those questions. Is this a question which may be helpful in order to offset the commercialization, a Salon de Refusés, or to put a different question which keeps me busy? Artist PhDs maybe ties in with that. I mean, that increasing proliferation of academia of art as a pitch. I mean, that attracts a lot of money. And that's very much on vogue. How can we discuss this in today's debate?
One is about this longue durée of art tastes that might change a lot and what gets institutionalized. I think actually that the money was in the salon. What was not in the salon was the Frühstück im Freien. They were both, yeah. Then, so one is about the longue durée of art taste. The other one is about medium and whether there is a kind of, whether the craze for painting and sculpture is something that is fueled by the art market, whereas there are different media that might be more, different art forms that might be more resistant to that. And the third question is about the art world becoming more and more academic, which also led to artists doing these, which is probably at the other end of the rediscovery of local practices of art, is that is a kind of very refined academic kind of art then.
Can I mention something on the second point,
Please.
on the media used? So I have two examples of artists that I have worked with. One of them is a Japanese group. They are kind of a super group. They're called Team Lab. I'm not sure whether you heard of them. They had shows in Pace Gallery and all this. So I worked with them in 2013, right? And presented a big project by them in the Singapore Biennale. And actually that was the project that launched them, even though before that they had a solo in Taiwan, in the National Museum, nothing happened after that. And Team Lab, if you are familiar with them, they call themselves ultra technologists. They are ahead of the technology. Whatever technology that exists, they go beyond. Because if you visit their studio, I visited their studio, I think, in 2012. At that time, 2012, there was 100 people working in the studio. They include mathematicians, engineers, architects, whatever you name it. And the reason why they exist, actually Inoko, the founder of Team Lab, the reason is very simple. He was a popular guy in university. He had lots of friends from all the different faculties, and he wanted to hang out with them even after school. So he set up this group so that he can hire all his friends, and they can work together, and therefore they became Team Lab.
And where does the money come from?
So when they first started, they used the technology and offered the technology to commercial businesses, like fashion houses and all this. So for example, they have one artwork, which is a hanger, clothes hanger. When you take it from the shop, you take it out, immediately you will see yourself projected onto the screen wearing that shirt. And the moment you take that hanger out, there starts an algorithm, a calculation, how long you hold that hanger, at what time of the day, data collection. So they do these kind of things, and then they do websites. It's very high technology. And Team Lab, when they did the show with Pace, I think in New York, and also in Beijing, they did with, I think Pace in Beijing also, right? Yeah. When they did the show in Pace, Pace is a commercial gallery, right? So what they told me is that you have to buy a ticket to see the show in Pace in Beijing. And on the opening night, the queue was like more than 1 kilometer long. And Team Lab's work is all about the experience. You must be there, you must see it in person, you must touch the thing, you must like play with it and all that. They have a permanent display in the Art Science Museum in Singapore, and it's the most popular exhibition like ever until today, it's still there. Then the second artist I want to mention, I curated this very young guy. It was commissioned by the K11 Foundation in China, in Hong Kong. Adrian Cheng, you might have heard him. He's also one of the gangsters now, buying everybody. And the interesting thing about Adrian Cheng and K11, he would buy really expensive contemporary art and hang it in his shopping center, because his shopping center concept is an art shopping center. Okay, so Adrian, right? So Adrian had a collaboration with Palais de Tokyo, saying that, okay, they want to feature more Chinese contemporary artists, young Chinese contemporary artists. So one day, my boss spoke to me, Jean Deloisy, the president of Palais. He said, okay, Kai, I want you to find me the next Ai Weiwei. You have 6 months to do a solo show with an unknown Chinese artist who will be the next, like the next big thing for Chinese contemporary art, right? So I said, okay, I'll do it. And then I managed to, I think. So I found this guy. His name is Tianzuo Chen. You might have heard of him by now. His work is inspired by Tibetan Buddhism. He graduated from university in London, 2 different universities, I think, Goldsmith, and the other one, I forgot the name of the university, but he enrolled in the wrong course. He went to graphic design instead of fine art. And then he corrected it when he was doing his master's. But anyway, his work, when I discovered him, he had actually done London Fashion Week. He had done Shanghai Fashion Week twice. All his clothes are sold out. But he's an artist. But he also does fashion show. He works a lot with the people from the subculture. Like he had, he was invited. I think there's a club here in Berlin, the techno club. What is it called? Again? Yeah, in Berghain. He was invited by Berghain to do a performance. So he told me he went there, he did a performance for 2. This is after my show. So we did the show in Palais. I called him. He was so excited, and then everything, and we made a performance where he collaborated with contortionists and Vogue dancers from Paris, and then some other pop singers from I think Sweden or somewhere, and then a Buto dancer. So it was. His work is a reflection of popular culture, like for example rap music, but in a very Chinese aesthetics, Chinese plus Tibetan aesthetics, which is sometimes quite scary. It looks really intimidating. And then he talks about drugs culture and everything. So for example, you see a music video of 2 guys rapping, right, like black kind of rap music, but except these 2 guys are not black. They are Chinese, and they are midgets, and they're wearing gold chains. They're like salivating, and they're tattooed all over, but the tattoos are all his artwork. It's like familiar yet strange. But people totally loved it. From that point, the show in Palais, he got exhibitions, performances, like every 2 weeks all over the world for the next like 1.5 years. Until today, it's like a new discovery. People were shocked. And people follow, and there was a journalist I met who specializes in making documentary that has been following him since that day in Palais de Tokyo until now. Even went to his village, interviewed the mother, interviewed the father, interviewed the people in his crew. So I think this medium, like for Tianzo, to see his art, you need to see it live. It needs to be performed. It's like Anne Imhoff's work, like the performance, and these are all. This is not painting. It's not sculpture. It's not even really performance art anymore. It's something else.
What made you think, because you said, and I think that takes us to the very beginning of the discussion, when you were talking about fashion and art and blurring lines, and you said sort of you worked in the fashion world before. What made you think, oh, he's in the wrong place, he shouldn't be in the fashion world, I take him to the art world? He really is an artist.
No, he was an artist, but by training, and he did fashion shows as part of his practice, but not as a fashion designer. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
So that means he has multiple dimension of work. The performance part, there's the residue of the performance, which then becomes the sculpture. He works with inflatables. He also paints. This kind of thing. But I think it is up to us then. How we open our minds. And he has collectors. Like Team Lab, crazy but true. People buy the TV screens. And Team Lab, if you work with them, you will realize that they don't just buy Samsung TV or Sony TV and put the DVD, flash disc and play. They have special TVs, like ultra high definition that you cannot buy in the shops. It's like they are part of the people who invented this thing. So it's totally something else now.
Thank you very much. I'd like to get back to the first question and give an answer, which again brings us back to the first question, the longue durée, i.e. fashion and art. I mean, it's just a snapshot, and you say, okay, Manet and the salon painters are just obsolete, etc. So art is just a snapshot, but this phenomenon currently is also seeing a change again to the benefit of the salon painters. And who knows where the development will go in 2 years down the road, and or maybe you can come up with an explanation why the salon painters gain more attention. Maybe one thing is to do with trophy art. In the 19th century, they were the most expensive artists, and when you look at them from today's standards, or says the history from today's standards, you want to find out who was very expensive in the 18th or 19th century, and that brings you to the salon painters. Last year, there was a solo exhibition of Alma Tadema in Vienna, which was inter alia announced by the most expensive painter of his time. And then they didn't give the exact prices, but just a ballpark figure of what the price tag was for these pieces. So this is the kind of argument which allows people to unearth it. And secondly, also social media are a platform where many people discover something which makes sense to them, because salon painters, of course, dealt with fabrics, dealt with fashion and lifestyles, narration, the entire Instagram accounts, which kind of copy salon painters. There's a Twitter account, Pre-Raphaelite Girls, explained by social media, where excerpts from salon painters' oeuvres are taken and translated into today's world. And again, you know, there's two angles to it, and they're very interesting. We also said a minute ago that they're instrumental in certain, you know, attention spans and art dimensions, etc. So somehow, something that was long forgotten is unearthed again and again. It garners more attention. I mean, when the Kunsthalle had an exhibition, suddenly more salon painters entered their rooms. I mean, this is no U-turn of the canon, but they're the first writings on the wall. Then something is, you know, changing again, and today's standards is projected onto other times. I mean, if we continue along that trend, money will be in the basement very soon.
One of the most famous monies is in her museum, in the Kunsthalle Mannheim.
Execution of the Emperor Maximilian.
Yeah, it won't never ever be in the cellar. I have one question, Amelis, before I open it for the last discussion round again. And I'm very happy that you sort of intervened and posed your questions during our conversation previously. And I have one question I really want you to ask, and maybe you have a quick answer to it. You all come from, or you have all worked in different art environments. And my question is about the specific state of this environment you work in and whether you consider good or bad conditions. There are always, when you deal with an art institution, with the art market, with an audience, there are laws and there are regulations. And my question is whether you feel that these laws and regulations are beneficial to the work you're doing or not. And if you could change one single law or regulation, what would it be?
Das kann ich sofort sagen, das öffentliche Vergaberecht in Deutschland.
I can tell you immediately the public bidding regulations in Germany.
Es behindert uns einfach, also es ist eines der Regularien, die wir hier als öffentliche Museen haben.
Which we are submitted to as public institutions. That's tendering.
Das meine ich jetzt aber durchaus auch nicht ganz unwitzig, aber
of course this is with a bit of a humorous touch to it, but being public and state-funded institutions and being submitted to some legal grounds in Germany, it's very difficult for us with a very small budget to work on an efficient basis because we do not have any power at all. I would like to make a plea on political terms for a special funding to be established for the museum so we can make most of reduced budgets. Thank you.
Well, we are always complaining, I think, in Finland about everything, about the weather, about the laws, and well, so, but when we, for instance, have a dialogue with the colleagues in here, for instance, we instantly notice that things are not so bad in Finland after all. So we were discussing with one artist, yes, about, for instance, about how female artists are feeling about having children or not, and does it affect their careers or not? And I was like, are you kidding? And this is not a question in Finland, not anymore, luckily. So we, in many prospects, we are very lucky. And also, even though many artists, my artist friends also are complaining about the financial conditions, of course, and they are not ideal, of course not, but at the same time, I'm aware that we have a very good grant system, which allows artists to work in a substantial time with a substantial grant and funding. So it makes the art world, I think, also healthy because we have that many kind of public funding sides in Finnish art world, aside of the private actors. So yeah, but what I would change maybe is one thing that has been a bit of a controversial issue for a decade, if I remember right, is that the donations, the art donations, would be tax deductible. So they are not. I mean, they've been a lot of work and also a lot of discussion in a parliamentary level even, but, well, there's no result yet, but let's hope. I think it would be a good thing to kind of activate the market and also the artists earn making.
Okay, tax deductions for Finland,
yeah.
Less bureaucracy for Germany. What's your wish?
For Singapore, I mean, one of the biggest criticism is censorship, right? But for me, I have no issues with that because I think censorship is part of the challenge anywhere in the world. I mean, even when I was working in Paris, I thought it was more open, but apparently not. You know, so if I have a big complaint about Singapore, it is funding, and actually too much funding to the artists. You know, so there is a case. We have a unique case where artists then become overly reliant on funding. They will not make the art until they get the money. So they have whatever vision, and then you go to their studios and you see nothing, or they don't have studios, or they, you know, so they become less hungry. You know, to be independent, truly independent. You know, they are always busy chasing after the grant money from the government, because the government gives out art grants relatively easily, and after many, many years, the artists all become dependent on this. And I think this
is not a very popular view in Singapore, I'm sure.
Yeah, but I think it needs to change, you know,
okay.
and I think I have a sense, I mean, from the last time I kind of spoke to the people of the Arts Council, they sense it too, but they find it difficult now. They're stuck to reverse that direction, you know, because they've been spoon feeding all the time. Now to take the money away, it puts them in a very difficult position. But I think we have to change that.
Yeah. Interesting view. Wolfgang Ullrich?
Ja, gut, als freier Autor bin ich ja erstmal privilegiert und habe nicht täglich mit Bürokratie zu
Being
tun.
a free author,
Aber früher oder später
I do not have to deal with red tape and bureaucracy every time. But yes, when I want to publish something and I need some pictures for the text, then copyright comes in and fees come in. So this happens to me all the time. 3 weeks ago, I didn't get the license to reprint a certain image, so I absolutely pay attention to this topic whenever it hits others too, and I see that museums, just like researchers and free authors, have the same problem. And I could imagine that a reform would do us good if works are in public property. There should be special rules on how to show these photos to the public, because it's impossible to see that Munich museums show some of the paintings they have on the website, and for copyright reasons they can't show contemporary art, either because the fees are so high that they would have to pay on a monthly basis for that, or because rights holders say no to this. So any works in public property should really be public in the sense of their use being freely accessible, and the right to quote on artists should also be facilitated. So this is what I would want to expect from standard setting.
You didn't get, or it was either you didn't get the rights or it was much too expensive.
No, I didn't get them.
You didn't get the rights. So Wolfgang Ullrich came up with the idea, which I think was a brilliant idea, to leave just blank spaces where the picture was supposed to be. So to make public what's sort of happening behind the scenes. Any more questions? Yeah.
Das ist keine Frage, die ich habe, aber ich habe gerade so gedacht, das würde ich mir wünschen für Berlin. Ich bin Künstlerin und ich glaube, Berlin zerstört sich gerade überhaupt die Basis des künstlerischen Arbeitens durch die ganzen Investoren, die diese Brachen oder überhaupt diese Künstlerorte aufkaufen und wo der Geldaspekt und das Gewinn erzielen so wichtig ist, dass man
chasing for the money has become so important that us artists who have also contributed to making this city what it actually is,
der Kultur
becoming less attractive. So this is what's happening. And I think that the Berlin government should join up with managers and industry representatives to
Loftdorf sozusagen innerhalb der Stadt
install something like
aus Zuneigung auch etwas
a village on the rooftops to give something back to those who have made this city so worth living in.
Also auch in sich gut
I would like to see this happening in a well-built environment. Everyone would benefit from that. This would be a win-win situation. And I would like to see this implemented. Being an artist myself.
Der Künstler, wo es nicht wieder so mafiöse
and it would also be good to offer artist choices which would not include finding mafia-type friends, but we need to give artists a chance who have not been discovered and taken to fame yet. So we can maintain this type of art in Berlin. This art scene is part for the reason for so many people coming to Berlin in the first place.
Closing remark. And I thank you all for coming. I thank my panelists a lot for their contributions and all the ideas they have enriched us with. And I wish you a wonderful afternoon. I also thank the organizers for sure for having us here, and I wish you all a beautiful afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a few closing words from my side. Thank you very much for this really very broad discussion on this really, I would say, complex issue. I just have a few words maybe to summarize, even if it's impossible to summarize 90 minutes in just 2 minutes. But I would, if I have to find a word as a title, I would say the task for museums should be in the future to stay independent. That seems to be the answer on this buzzword of trophy art, that independency is what is necessary for public houses. And we have certain aspects which were mentioned in order to stay independent. I have here this notice, dig in your own collection. Find treasures which are maybe hidden in your own collection that you can offer instead of showing trophy art in your house. Discover new talents was one other aspect that was mentioned. Enable new media was an answer on one of the comments from the audience. Stay self-confident, and this was the aspect I liked most from Ms. Ullrich. Stay self-confident because at the end all art will find the way to museums, and this is really something that I would say is really what brings it to a good end. So thank you very much for this discussion. I would like to invite you to 2 aspects from our house. One is we have a wonderful exhibition in which this discussion this afternoon found place. It is an exhibition which was curated by the artist herself, Leiko Ekimura, and she invited 2 other artists as correspondents. This was Wim Wenders and Donata Wenders. Please take the time to have a stroll around. And if you have seen enough, please join us with our reception 1 floor above us. And the last thing is, which I forgot, I really want to thank our team. They did a wonderful job this afternoon.